Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Today, I'm joined by Nicki Jhabvala of the Washington Post and JP Finlay of NBC Sports Washington as we answer your questions to 5 burning topics, some of course involving quarterback and others involving the direction of the franchise. This will be the first of a 2-part podcast with Nicki and JP. By the way, you can follow Nicki on Twitter at Nicki Jhabvala, Jhabvala, and JP at JP Finlay NBCS. You can also catch the 3 of us on Sunday mornings at 7:30 on NBC4 in Washington on the Washington Football Showtime. And of course, you can read me on ESPN.com. Our second part will deal with what life is like on this beat. I'll get more into what to expect in the second half of the season on a future podcast next week. Before I play my conversation, you'll hear at the end of this one that I said we had 2 more questions. Well, I only got to 1 because we kind of ran out of time, kept them a little bit longer than I had promised them. So I'm going to answer the one question I didn't get to. One of the questions that I actually was going to get to will actually be the topic for one of next week's podcasts about the second half of the year, players to watch, etc. So I don't want to answer that now because I can talk about it next week. Instead, John Taman wanted to know, have you gotten any inkling as to why Ron feels such loyalty to Taylor Heinicke? Seems to me he's got minimal investment and a similar relationship with Kyle Allen, who has actually demonstrated he can win NFL games and has a stronger arm. Is the injury still bugging Allen? My understanding is that no, the injury is not. Now, I believe this was a few weeks ago, maybe a month or 2 ago, where you heard that Kyle Allen was really looking like he did before. I also know at the end of last year that Ron Rivera said that they would have done what they did if Kyle Allen had stayed healthy. That's the kind of confidence they had in them. And then that Tampa Bay game happened. I think that changed a lot of things. So in talking to some people, the feeling around Allen is that it would take a massive interception game by Heinicke to force a change. And I'm talking like 6, 7, 8. So in other words, they didn't see it happening. They know that Rivera is wedded to Heinicke. I don't quite have a great handle as to why, other than what I kind of said earlier, to be honest. I know his legs can provide a spark. I also know that they do talk a lot about how that he's still young and developing. He's only started 9 games. I think they're curious to see what level he can get to. I know that when he's going right, he plays with confidence, and that rubs off on others. And he's done some good things. We saw it at the end of the Falcons game. We saw it at the end of the Giants game, even after that interception. So did Allen last year when he started. And there are some plays that you see that Heinicke misses, some throws in the red zone that were available that he didn't get. But I think with Allen, I think they know the ceiling. One person had told me that they view Heinicke as that people there view him as a low-end starter, but a high-quality backup. So I think they're really trying to develop him. And when you hear Ron Rivera, he'll talk about, well, as he gets more experience, he'll learn this and he'll learn this. So I do think, like I said, I think they look at him as maybe not quite a finished product. I also wonder if Rivera is still swayed by how players reacted to Heinicke at the end of last season, mainly like a guy like Chase Young and Terry McLaurin. Not that just that those two are demanding that he plays, but just the impact that he had on the players. But his play is inconsistent, and I do hear frustration from various people close to some players. That's kind of natural in the situation. They are 2-6, and he's not always playing great. That's going to happen. But JP and Nicki and I do discuss quarterbacks more on here. But I did want to try to answer this question before I got going. I don't know that I gave you a great answer because I'm not sure that I fully understand it myself, even though I do think it's a lot of what I said. Anyway, hope that helps, John. So now let's get to my roundtable mailbag with JP and Nicki Jhabvala. All right, so usually I do these mailbags by myself. My back's getting a little bit sore, my knees are aching, so I needed some help. So I have Nicki Jhabvala and JP Finlay here with me to answer some of your questions. And I wanted to get a broad range of opinions for these, and these are some topics I think people want to know about. So let me get to the first one here. And this is appropriate because we've just passed the deadline for the trades, and this guy's still out there, but he's got a lot of baggage. So a couple people want to know, Cole Hearn and then Sell the Team Danny Boyd, both want to know about Deshaun Watson. Basically, why won't Washington go in on a quarterback like Watson? I know he has no trade clause, but I'm with JP Finlay on this. Who cares about the bad PR? We need a QB that will help us win. Would you be interested, or they want to hear our opinions on that? So I'll start on this one. First, the no trade clause pretty much is going to kill that here. I think a few things would have to happen. Right now, that's not going to happen. But then the other part is the legal part. Nobody knows when that's going to end. The civil case, I think, will be, going on in May. And the criminal case, if there is one, if they send it to a grand jury, we don't know what the timetable is on that. So I think that will make any trade with Watson hard. But I'm curious to hear your guys' opinion. Nikki?
I agree. I mean, why would you take on that contract and give up significant assets if you don't even know the guy will be available? I mean, the league hasn't said he cannot play, but if something changes in that legal case, he could be placed on the commissioner's exempt list. He could be placed on the commissioner's exempt list anyway. I'm sorry, people keep saying he has to be charged with a felony to be placed. No, he could be placed on it anyway. But it's just so counterintuitive to what Ron Rivera has preached since the day he arrived in terms of finding players with the right character. Now, he could be innocent in all this. I'm not rushing to judgment, but you think about what he is dealing with right now, Deshaun Watson, and does that fit with what Ron is trying to build? I would say absolutely no.
JP, do you embrace the do whatever because people hate you anyway?
Go all in. Let's start by saying the allegations are abhorrent, and if they're proved, I mean, the reason this thing is dragging on in civil court is because he won't just settle, which leads me to believe he doesn't think he did it. Now, I don't know. We'll find out. I also think it's weird that everything popped up once he publicly demanded the trade out of Houston. Like, to me, there's just so much weirdness surrounding this. And kind of most importantly, some major changes would have to happen before he could get here. We'll recognize that. I don't think this is happening, but I think the thought process is where this organization needs to be. They haven't had a quarterback for 30 years and maybe 60 years. Go back to Sonny Jurgensen if you want. The other strategy here is to hit a winning Powerball ticket because it's so damn hard to just draft the right rookie quarterback. They had one. They had Kirk. They ran him out of town. They had Robert. He got hurt, and everything went to complete and utter bad places. Like, this franchise is so broken. The only thing that can fix it is a franchise quarterback that can win games year after year. Deshaun can do that. And, dude, here's the one thing I'll say. If you don't want Deshaun Watson on your team because of what he's allegedly done and you are taking a moral stand against that, I got no argument. That's entirely fair. But if it's because they can't take more PR, get out of here. All this team does is take more bad PR. The Reuben Foster thing. Things could never get
bad PR.
They got worse a month later.
The month of October.
And if it's because you're worried he goes on the commissioner exempt list, do it now. Who cares? Suspend him the rest of the season. This season is shot. Now that the trade deadline is passed, it's less relevant. And I think what's going to end up happening is we'll get to maybe it comes out earlier, but my guess is it's March and he goes somewhere better and plays well and perhaps pays a bunch of fines. I don't know. And Washington's stuck in the continuous search for QBX.
And I was also curious, because Miami obviously is the favorite destination for him, it clearly seems. And the fact that they didn't get anything done now makes me wonder what they maybe learned in some of this.
That Ross wanted him to settle, and that's what he needed to make this thing happen.
Yeah, I don't know all that. But the other part of it too is, again, I think if that civil case is still ongoing in May, and maybe even if there's a criminal case, that's why this thing could get pushed on for a long time, possibly. So anyway, let's go to question number 2. At no pressure at Gone Ride. How likely is it that Washington will be much more aggressive pursuing a quarterback in the first round of the 2022 draft? He felt they were too passive for his liking last year, though he understood the building process. Nikki, how aggressive do you think they'll be?
I think they have to be aggressive, but if they keep going at the rate they are, they're going to land a top 5 pick. So they, they're going to hold pat and should be able to get, one of the top quarterbacks. The question is that what they want? Do they want a young guy or do they want to try to sign, a veteran? The really good ones don't hit the free agent market. So they're going to have to decide if they really are built to develop a quarterback, if they like the quarterbacks in this draft, or if they want to get another rental. I'm so over the rental quarterback thing. I just don't think it helps anyone. That said, you don't want to mortgage the future to a guy that you don't believe can be good, because if the staff is not all in, then that quarterback is going to be gone in 2 years. So I think they could have a top 10 pick for sure
right now.
Well,
yeah. And I think the hard part will be will they like anybody in this draft enough? But if you don't, what's the alternative? And can you sell that another year? And I know when I did that big quarterback piece early in the year before, whatever, I think it was before the Thursday night game, but going through all their starters, I talked to Mel Kiper about some of it. Actually, no, I'm sorry. This was for the Chase Young, Justin Herbert story before the Chargers game, looking back on that draft. And Mel Kiper was the only one who advocated at the time for them drafting a quarterback, because the philosophy is if you don't have one, you've got to draft one. And they may not have it at that point, but I don't like the idea of forcing one. The funny thing is, last thing, JP, and I'll go to you on this, but when we were in Green Bay, I was talking to our Packers reporter, Rob Domofsky, and he was talking about how he's having a hard time coming up with new stories to write about Aaron Rodgers because he's been there forever. And I'm like, well, I'm the opposite, because all we get here are new stories on quarterbacks, because every few months it's like the weather in Cleveland. You stick around 10 minutes, it's going to change, and so that's what we get. But what do you think, JP?
What a great problem to have to run out.
I know. Aaron Rodgers. I don't know. Yeah, it's like a billionaire saying, I have so much money, I don't know how to spend it anymore.
Come run out of stories to write about Dan Snyder. See how much fun that is. I don't think they love any of these quarterbacks. I don't think any of these quarterbacks are going to be. I mean, by the time we get to April, we'll be saying something different. But
possibly
right now, every talent evaluator you talk to says, I mean, there's not a top. If you're just picking off talent, there's not a top 10 QB. This draft has lots of good players, but they're not quarterbacks. I think they're going to finish with a top 5, top 7 pick. I think because free agency opens up before the draft, there's a chance that they have something that they're going to try to sell. But Nicki said something that I think is interesting and really is what's most important and really hasn't happened here, at least in the last decade, is whatever strategy they go with, whatever plan they embark upon, everyone has to be into it and they have to stick to it. So if it's get a veteran and make a run for 2-3 years, you got to stick with it. And if it's draft some kid and sign Mariota or Trubisky, whoever, I think those are real options, by the way.
I think so too.
I think, okay. I mean, the problem is if you don't have one thing, if you present a secondary option in this city before Halloween, people will ask for the second option.
There is no patience in the NFL, especially when it comes to the quarterback position. I mean, I always try to think, what if John Elway had to be a rookie in the NFL nowadays? I mean, he would have been on team number 3 already, with the way he played as a rookie. It's just, there's no.
And I always go back again. I always think, these people that you write for and all that, and the stuff that they've gone through with these quarterbacks and the false hopes over the years, that it gets exhausting for them to have to wait for another one to possibly come through. But, I think the hard part with this draft class is they may have to do that, but, we'll see what happens. But anyway, so I do think they're going to be aggressive trying to get a quarterback. I just don't know if they're going to get their long-term answer. It's just, it's kind of impossible to know right now. So let's get to the next question. All right. Going back to kind of quarterbacks, and this is from Shockingly 2 and 6. Some of these avatars are kind of funny. How different would the season be if Fitzpatrick and Samuel were healthy? Do you think it'd make a difference, JP? And how much of one? And we've talked about some of this on like the Washington Football Showtime. People can watch us on there. I wanted to plug that.
Yeah, damn right. We'll have a show. There's no bye week for that show. Sunday morning, 7 a.m. or 7:30. Channel 4. I think I really don't want this to be a hot take, but perhaps it will be. I think if you had a fully healthy Curtis Samuel through 8 games, might have had a bigger impact than a fully healthy Ryan Fitzpatrick for 8 games. I think Fitz helps you when Heineke was so they go to Buffalo. Fitz ain't winning that game. Heineke certainly wasn't winning that game, right? Maybe Fitz helps you against the Chargers week 1, especially having to come out in the middle of the game and stuff. That's just always screws things up. I don't think Fitz wins that Atlanta game that Heineke does because it was so much reliant on his legs.
And the defense struggled. Right.
I think Fitz could have beaten the Saints maybe or the Chiefs. I think those games Heineke was awful and it was kind of inexplicable.
Right.
But there's stuff Heineke gives you that Fitz doesn't. But I think if you had Samuel all along, we have no idea what this offense would look like. The really little part we saw him capable of running around for that, what was it, first half in Atlanta, basically, I think the offense looked so much closer to complete. But how much different? They're 2-6. Maybe it's 3-5. They've been so bad. Like
the defense's struggles has been the problem.
Totally. Yeah.
What do you think, Nicki?
I mean, I agree with JP. Like if it were just Fitz and you had the same issues on offense, same issues defense, same injuries, I would argue probably not. I mean, you might see him a few more, completions or, couple, I don't know. He might have made, better decisions on a couple plays. But I think Heineke has also saved a number of drives and games that maybe Fitz couldn't just with his mobility. So I don't know that it'd be totally different with just that swap, but you introduced Curtis Samuel in there. And with Heineke add in his mobility, I think it could be different. Sure. I think Terry McLaurin has one of the hardest jobs on this team just because he's the closest thing they have to a leader, first of all, and he's their best player and can't do everything that he should be doing statistically because he draws the most attention, So I think it would be a completely different offense for both him and Curtis and the other players around them. So yeah, I think it's been very hard for them to establish any sort of identity given their injuries across the board over the last 2 years. I don't know what Scott Turner's offense is really, because he probably doesn't know yet.
And somebody else asked me that too. That was one of the questions about, how can you judge Scott Turner? I think it's hard until you get the quarterback in there. You can see, some flashes of things. You see things you like and things you don't like. But what I know is over the last 2 years, they probably had some of the worst quarterback play in general. And I do think, I thought they would beat. I think they would have beaten Denver with those two in there because there are too many plays in the red zone that I saw it's available. You just have to complete the ball. And then there are other plays. I'm like, well, you're right. He did save this play with the scrambles, with this or that. But I do think there were some plays available. And then the combination, you're right, JP. I think Curtis would be a huge deal in that because of how he can change that offense. So next one, Keith wants to know, when do you think it will be fair to assess Ron Rivera's job performance, assuming they will be pursuing his QB1 this offseason? Does the clock start then? I'll start because I think you assess it the entire time. I don't think you wait for a quarterback because you still are charged to build the roster, and this is still your team, and you can still look like a quality team until you have that QB1. And so I think it's fair to judge it the entire time and judge everything. I mean, I assume you guys agree with that? I'm not waiting for a quarterback just to judge it. I think how far they can go, yes, but you can still build a good team around that player.
They did that. They didn't have good quarterback play last year, and the defense was able to perform. I think if you're judging Ron right now, that's kind of the question, right? Like, when is the right time to judge Ron?
Right.
I think you got to separate a little Ron the coach and Ron the personnel guy.
Yeah.
I don't know that you can separate that, but they need a good offseason of personnel moves next year to kind of validate some of this stuff, because Ron's first year, he had Kyle, and Kyle was the one giving the press conference in Indy. Like he was the guy in charge, and then he's not. And then that year, things went pretty well. Like Logan Thomas, J.D. McKissick, Wes Schweitzer, these dudes, nobody was like, are you serious? And they all delivered. The draft class was good. And then a year later, The free agents, you spend some money, and those guys have not delivered. And injuries happen, but they still have not delivered. The draft class, I mean, Cosby looks like a player. But
mixed results.
Yeah, I think they need a good offseason. I think one thing I've been impressed by, and we have seen this plenty, John, is when players just check out. Players just like, man, F this. This guy ain't it. I haven't seen that. So I think from a coach perspective, they may be getting out schemed, maybe getting out talented. I don't know, but they're still buying in. But I think you can question what's happening from the front office for sure.
And you have to. And I think to your point, JP, is, it's funny because you talk to people who are close to these players and all that. And I ask them all the time, what do they think of Rivera? And it's, they love him. He loves him. I hear that a lot. So now whether it's universal, unless you talk to all 53 or however many guys are in there, then you don't really know. So one guy doesn't speak for everybody. That's that person's experience with them. But, I hear more complaints about maybe some of the coaches, some of the other assistants and how they're being charged. Because the other point someone made to me is like, he doesn't coach the offense or defense. He's a CEO. So he's able to step back and oversee. And I think that maybe helps him with the players. I don't know. But what do you think, Nicki?
I think he can and should be judged at this point. He took this job to be the face of the franchise. He wanted to run his show top to bottom. That comes with the criticism. He built that front office. He built the coaching staff. Those are his assistants, 90% of them anyway, from that he brought with him from Carolina. So if they're not up to snuff, that ultimately goes to him. He may not be the one in the room directly, but he's responsible for everybody below him, which is the entire football operations. You look at this offseason, and we can make comparisons to Kyle Smith and this and that. Kyle Smith had a lot of not so great picks, or that staff had a lot of not so great picks, but we still haven't gotten clarity on how exactly this front office works. You got like 5 guys with GM experience, and we don't know who does what. I hope they know. They haven't said to us. But you look at the guys they brought in, both free agents, via trade, draft picks. I think DeAndre Carter is the best guy they've brought in, or the most productive guy they've brought in. Curtis Samuel will ultimately be that, I think, but he hasn't been available. So there's a lot of new players, and they haven't been available.
Right. The injuries have really hurt that. And that's,
they have. And then William Jackson, your big name signings haven't been
correct.
What you expected. So that ultimately falls on your staff and ultimately on
correct.
Ron Rivera.
That's a decision they made. So, all right, we've got 2 more, and I'll try to keep this quick here. Ash burning. And so we go to the Ashburn syndrome. Ash burning. With so many impending big contracts coming up this and next year, why would you say rebuilding is a 3 to 5 year project without trading for draft capital? If that's your mindset. And I think he's talking about the 3 to 5 years that Ron talked about with changing the culture. And I think that there's a difference between 3 and 5 years of a rebuild and 3 and 5 years of changing culture. So I know what my own take is. The rebuild, based on what I've heard in talks over the last years, they felt like they could get to a point within the next year or 2. At a point where you're a strong contender with the right parts. The 3 to 5 years, I felt, and maybe this is my take on it, that the 3 to 5 years is changing the culture. When the culture goes from in every other year to consistent winning and developing consistent winning habits in an organization. And that's the part that I thought he was talking about there. Did I read that right or wrong?
I kind of lumped them together, changing all the, making them a successful football team.
It can't take that long, dude.
I was going to say, no, we know how this team is. There's not, whether he needs that long or not, there's not going to be the patience for that long.
Well, I don't think the NFL would allow that. 5 years I think Ron is really savvy or at least tries to establish expectations on a really big level. And I think that's what a lot of that is. And I do think, this dude, people sleep on how much he reads and how educated he is. He has read that in military manuals.
Oh, no doubt. There's no doubt.
It's about building a country and setting up democracy. Win some games, dude. Get a quarterback, win some games.
And like I said, I do think, again, maybe I'm just naive and trying to parse it too much. And that's probably, I overanalyze things, and I think I may be doing it here.
Well, John, because I think he parses too much. You know what I mean? Like, drill it down, like say a little less some of the.
Yeah. And that's fair. And like,
Nothing's going to change until they get a quarterback.
Well, and that's true.
Everything else doesn't matter.
I also think that we've heard that word culture a million times in the last year. And
I'm hearing about culture when the DEA just rolled up. So, and that's
true. Listen, that's all part of it. So yeah, but I do, like, what I know, I hear, and when you talk to people over there, they'll talk about 1 to 2 years where they're building to a, like, for example, why they didn't go after a quarterback last year, whether it was give more for Matthew Stafford or trade up to get a guy in the draft, because, like, well, when we have to, when we're ready, we'll go do it. So anyways, there you go. I appreciate you guys sticking on here this long, and I took you longer than I wanted to, so I appreciate it. There's one more question, but I'm going to answer it before you guys come on, so that way they'll get their answer and I can give it to them too. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Johnny. It was fun.
That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to JP and Nicki for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back with these two for a Life on the Beat episode on Friday. Talk to you next time.